Hello and welcome. We'll get started in just a moment, but before we do, we have a few housekeeping items to discuss. On the right-hand side of your screen, you're able to submit questions to the presenter for the Q&A session afterwards. We'll do our best to get to all the questions, but if we don't get to you, we'll be emailing you directly for a follow-up. In addition, the slides will be available as well. So with that, let's begin. Welcome everyone to F5 on AWS and how MailControl improved their application visibility and security. I'm Matt Lewis. I'm a solution architect over here at Amazon Web Services. I work with a lot of our security and networking partners, so a lot of infrastructure-based services with AWS. We also have Nathan McKay, the security solutions engineer at F5, and also Corey Waggyhoff, director of infrastructure at MailControl. Okay, so to start with, we have your data and IP, which are your most valuable assets. And we have a couple of quotes here and a few numbers on based around security. So firstly, on the left-hand side, we have 6.53 million, which is the average cost of a data breach, according to the CSID. That's quite a lot if you think about the average data breach and how much it's actually costing organizations out there, and you wonder why security is such an important thing for organizations. According to PwC or PricewaterhouseCoopers and their Security Information Security Survey, there's been a 56% increase in theft of hard intellectual property in recent times. Now, that's quite an increase in theft of IP. So again, security is one of the things that can help with this. Also, 70% of consumers indicated they'd avoid doing business following a security breach, also according to the CSID. And I mean, this goes without saying almost that if you're doing business with an entity and they have a security breach, you're going to question the security practices of that organization and perhaps even stop doing business with them altogether. There's some pretty compelling numbers here in relation to security and organizations out there today. So AWS, it can be more secure than your existing environment. Well, how can we really look into that a little bit further? So firstly, in June 2015, the IDC released a report which found that most customers can be more secure in AWS than their on-premise environment. And in fact, we had Rob Alexander, the CEO of Capital One, come out and say that their deployment on AWS is in fact more secure than their on-premise environment. So what are some of the things that AWS can provide to allow you to secure your environment and the controls to tweak and adjust the security when you're building things with AWS? Well, firstly, we have automation and logging, automated logging and monitoring. So things like CloudTrail, things like VPC flow logs. This gives you visibility into your AWS environment. We also have things like CloudWatch, where you can dive into what your instances and other entities within AWS are actually doing at a certain point in time, how they're performing and that sort of thing. We also simplify resource access. So we have our identity and access management, or IAM, so you can control who can access resources. We also have what are called IAM roles. So when you have something that's built and running in AWS, you can specify what that entity has access to within AWS. So you can control the security layers. And security really is a layered approach. When you're thinking about an on-premise environment or whether you're thinking about in AWS, it's good to build up your security layers, and IAM roles can help do that. We also make it easy to encrypt your data properly in AWS, and that's always a good idea to turn on encryption. So we have encryption for things like our elastic block store volumes. We have encryption for things like S3. So we allow you to and give you the provisions to encrypt your data in AWS. We also do enforce strong authentication, and a great example of this is dual-factor authentication. So when you log into your AWS account, it's a great idea to enable dual-factor authentication, and you can build rules around your user access to force this type of strong authentication when your users are accessing your AWS environment and your AWS account to build things. So here we have the shared responsibility for security. Now, this is an interesting slide because it really shows the full stack of how something would be deployed on AWS. So on the bottom portion of the slide, we have the responsibilities of AWS from a security perspective. So you can think about it as security of the cloud. So the actual data centers themselves, the availability zones, the regions, the edge locations, and then also our core services that sit on top of that. So compute, storage, database, and networking. AWS is responsible for the security of these components. So think about it like physical access to a building or a region or an availability zone. We control the security around these physical aspects and the security of the cloud itself. On the top half of the slide, we've got security in the cloud. Conversely to security of the cloud, security in the cloud is really something that's the customer's responsibility. So your responsibility when you're building something on AWS. So for example, enabling client-side data encryption and data integrity or authentication, things like server-side encryption, network traffic protection. So enabling these things is really up to you as a customer. And we help by giving you the ability to enable security around these pieces. For example, we give you security groups where you can specify the firewall rules, I guess you could say, around a security group on who can actually access EC2 instances, for example. We give you that construct. We give you the ability to do things like identity and access management roles. You can configure those. So AWS is providing that capability, but the responsibility for that security and the security of your applications in the cloud is really up to you, the customer. So first here around constantly monitored. So AWS infrastructure is protected by extensive network and security monitoring systems. What that basically means is we have a large security operations center. We have a lot of folks and systems in place that monitor the security of the cloud. So for example, we do have now our denial of service protection offering where you can use that as a customer, but prior to that, and actually many years before that, we were doing denial of service protection of the cloud from an infrastructure perspective. So we handle a lot of the security pieces of the cloud from, again, the security of the cloud, that bottom half of the security responsibility model. Also, we give you things like AWS CloudTrail. So AWS CloudTrail, and CloudTrail is actually enabled by default on all new accounts now as of recent times. And what that basically means is any API calls that happen within your AWS account are monitored. So if someone uses an API, and the CLI and also the console are doing API calls as well back to AWS. If someone goes to spin up an EC2 instance or changes some form of security group, these will all be monitored through CloudTrail. And when that's enabled, you can go back through there and have a look at everything that's going on within your platform. We also have things like Amazon Inspector, where we can assess for vulnerabilities on your instances. And think of Inspector like an agent-based solution that runs within your EC2 instances and looks for vulnerabilities. So we're really giving you monitoring from an infrastructure perspective, but then also the controls and abilities you can use to monitor your platform that you build in AWS as well. AWS is also something that's been built to be extremely highly available. So we do build our AWS infrastructure so that we have no single points of failure, etc. And we give that ability to you to spin up things like EC2 instances, for example, in what we call availability zones. So an availability zone can be basically considered like a grouping of data centers. So we have 42 availability zones in 16 regions or across 16 different regions. So what that does is it gives you a highly available capability to deploy applications within a region, but then also global reach where you can deploy in any of our 16 regions worldwide. And we don't actually move data from region to region. That's up to you. You really control the data and where it resides. So from a compliance standpoint, if you needed to be in a specific region, that's absolutely up to you as the customer to control. You can also mitigate the risk of DDoS attacks. As I said, we do have a new DDoS service now, but things like auto scaling and Route 53 can help with load balancing and scaling your infrastructure, not just under a DDoS attack, but if it was real traffic and let's just say your platform expanded greatly in a short amount of time, auto scaling can help with that. We also give you the ability to integrate with your existing resources. So we enable you to integrate with things like Active Directory. We also have this thing called AWS Direct Connect, and Direct Connect is what you can use to connect back to your on-premise deployment. Think of it like your own private fiber that comes into an Amazon point of presence, where we have Amazon routers that we manage, and then we can bring you in to either a VPC, your virtual private cloud, or into our public services as well. We also have our key management service, or Amazon KMS, where you can manage your own encryption keys as well if you so choose. Along with this, the AWS platform also has an extensive list of certifications. So we've got things like ISO 27001, the Information and Security Management certification. We adhere to the payment card industry DSS or PCI DSS or data security standard. So we can help you run workloads that adhere to things like PCI DSS on AWS. Some other certifications that are worth mentioning, things like HIPAA, the Health Information Portability and Accountability Act. We can help you to build solutions that are HIPAA compliant on AWS. And a lot of our services are HIPAA compliant and help you build HIPAA compliant platforms. Some others here, we're also a part of the Federal Risk Authorization Management Program, or FedRAMP, if you were a US government entity. So there's a whole lot of certifications that we have for the AWS platform that help you be more secure in AWS and adhere to the certifications that you would typically use either in your pre-existing environment. You can now use those in AWS as well. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand over to Nathan McKay from F5 Networks, and he's going to continue to talk about the F5 story. Thanks, Nathan.
Awesome, thanks, Matt. Looks like I do have control there. So cool. Yeah, again, my name is Nathan McKay. I'm going to just kind of be discussing our offering in AWS. So kind of the basis for our solution and the technology is this idea of full proxy security. And really what that means is that the F5 software and infrastructure can act as, you know, like an intermediary between all of the client traffic you receive and your backend infrastructure. So, you know, what we like to say is that we have application fluency at every layer of the stack. And really what this allows you to do is to, you know, have granular control and policies over what comes into your network, whether that be at like the network or the transport layer, or, you know, like it could be even at the SSL layer. And further up the stack, of course, we can do, since we're doing this translation, this intermediary, we can, of course, receive and inspect any L7 traffic like HTTP traffic and do any kind of translation or routing of that based on rules that you might create yourself. So one of the things we also have here that we like to discuss, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, is this technology we call iRules, which is basically, you know, a programming language that can be used to make decisions or respond in certain ways based on, you know, any kind of conditions you might receive. So for instance, a good example is, if you recall, the Mirai bot attacks last year that were very high profile. You know, we had one of our engineers, well, when it was found that there was a vulnerability in the Mirai code where if you sent a given response back to a Mirai bot, you could crash that bot instance and stop receiving, you know, attacks from that source. So we have technology that allows you to respond dynamically to those types of conditions, and that's really what the full proxy security solution is all about. So from there, again, this is all about, you know, visibility and being able to see these types of traffic, this type of traffic and events, And we know that SSL utilization is increasing dramatically and has over the past few years, especially after the Snowden leaks, for instance. And that's kind of created this problem with visibility and increased blind spots into this traffic, because clearly we can't secure what we can't see. We've had discussions with customers who have indicated that it appears that their security solutions like SIEMs are becoming more effective over time, but really we've seen in practice that the increase in SSL has made it more difficult for that type of infrastructure like the SIEMs and the IDS and IPS to see the actual attacks as they take place. So this is a really important consideration when evaluating how to implement this type of technology. So, obviously there's a variety of different, application threats that we have to deal with, and they kind of all require this or unique approaches to them, right? As we discussed earlier, the concept of defense in depth, it really requires this layered approach to security, and there's really no one silver bullet to handling this on a holistic basis. So, if we talk about volumetric attacks, right, these are the ones we know, or kind of the traditional DDoS style attacks we know, where we just receive more traffic than we can possibly handle. And there's also these attacks on crypto that we're seeing more and more. Again, as SSL utilization grows, your capacity for terminating and negotiating SSL sessions becomes more and more important, and that can be a potential weak spot. So that's really an important area of consideration. We've also got like attacks on RAM. So this could be stuff like, trying to exceed connection table limitations, pretty standard resource utilization problems. The same with like attacks on CPU. This could be like L7 style denial of service attacks, where somebody might be trying to initiate extremely large or costly database calls in order to, crash the backend infrastructure or slow it down, or force you to incur additional cost in your cloud deployment. And then obviously we've got attacks on the server infrastructure, and this could be like known attacks or known vulnerabilities against your application stack, like Nginx or Apache, or the operating systems themselves. So we need a way to identify and deal with those. And finally, we've got this concept of targeted attacks, right? So this would be where some entity might have taken special interest in your company or your organization for whatever reason. Maybe it's intellectual property theft or industrial espionage, but they may be looking at your site from a more specific goal in that respect. So this could be even like fraud related, and it's more like a business logic type problem. So moving on from there. So how do we improve our application security and posture quickly and easily? Well, web application firewall is a great way to get started, but we've seen in practice that these can be complicated to manage, right? In many parts of the industry, they've kind of gotten that reputation for being difficult to deal with, but we can implement it in AWS using out-of-box policies that really substantially decrease your the resource investment required and allow you to focus on the larger problems at hand. So how do we do this? Well, first off, it's easier for us to just block known bad requests. We have a pretty good handle on SQL injection, command injection, and cross-site scripting these days. So those are easy to filter out and just get rid of right off the bat. But we also want to stop talking to bad bots, right? We know that there's definitely some good bots out there, but there's quite a lot of these malicious bots that are trying to do things like conduct DDoS attacks or do web scraping or forced cost incursion for web fraud reasons, etc. So we do have this technology that allows us to identify these bots based on, like source addresses or attack patterns or things of that nature. And we can do that proactively, right? So being able to inject JavaScript to identify whether or not, we're looking at headless browser attacks, or whether or not we're dealing with actual people based on longer term session analysis. We can also do things like just block bad IPs. There's definitely known scanners and botnets and malware hosts out there, and we can gather and use that intelligence in order to just drop requests from those sources to begin with. This could also include like geolocation enforcement. If we know that we're getting attacked specifically from a given region, we can deal with that region or block those requests outright from that source. So this gives you a great opportunity to not only protect against these kinds of attacks, but to lower your costs in the cloud based on the fact that you can reduce the amount of traffic you're even receiving and processing. Another important consideration is to hide details that nobody needs, right? A lot of the common software stacks provide various details and signatures that can be used to identify them and figure out what types of vulnerabilities can be used to exploit them. So if we think of the Shodan search engine, for instance, Shodan is a search engine that catalogs devices out on the internet and looks for the signatures that are used to identify them. So things like IP cameras or specific, software stacks. And ultimately what will happen is when a new vulnerability is announced in that software, people can just go straight to Shodan and get a list of all of the infrastructure that's been already scanned and conduct the attacks much quicker. So it's really important to make sure that this information is not visible and easily, readily available. So we can also filter out any outbound data that may be sensitive in nature. So for instance, credit card numbers, account numbers, social security numbers, we can look for all of this stuff as it leaves your network and either take action based upon it or alert you or just log it, etc. So this is, a great way to make sure that there's not, like errors in coding that would cause this type of information to be lost. And finally, really importantly, we need to have this visibility. We need to be able to see what kinds of hostile traffic we're dealing with. And this is a big part of having like a threat intelligence program to know what type of attacks you're dealing with and on what basis. Another really important aspect to this is, we've had conversations with people and customers in the field who've indicated to us that up to 40% of the traffic on their sites is bot traffic, right? So it's important to be able to know and see reductions in that bot traffic when you implement a solution like the F5 WAF. And finally, ultimately what we're trying to do here is defend against, these L7 DDoS attacks. Really, we want to be able to continuously track app performance and session information in order to make sure that we're letting only the legitimate users through so that you can maintain brand reputation with your customers. Because if they can't use your site because the bots are using it, then that's ultimately a form of denial of service, right? So to get started with this, we've got a few different deployment models. One is the prepackaged solution. You can get the F5 WAF from AWS Marketplace, and this includes a lot of pre-built policies for given types of applications, or just sensible stuff that is easy to take care of. So that's a great way to get up and running very, very quickly. If you have more complex or need customization, you can also, of course, just deploy the Big IP solution, which includes WAF and a number of other features, and roll it yourself. So we know that a bunch of customers want to be able to do things DevOps style and version security policies and whatnot, and be able to deploy those on the fly. And this is a great way to be able to enable that type of deployment model. So as we mentioned, we do have CloudFormation templates available for use and deployment right now. They are designed and tested by F5 experts, and they're a great way to get up and running in the most expedient fashion possible. So again, these are available on the AWS marketplace. We do have the pay-as-you-go options and utilization-based consumption models, and we do support, a lot of the Amazon core functionality like auto scaling and things of that nature. So it's a great way to be able to grow this type of security solution as your customer base and traffic grows as well. So at this point, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Corey Waggy-Hoft, who's the Director of Infrastructure at MailControl, to tell you a little bit more about how they were able to make use of F5 in AWS. So, Corey?
Thank you, Nathan. Hey, everyone. My name is Corey Waggy-Hoft, as he said. I'm the Director of Infrastructure here at MailControl. We use AWS and F5 on a daily basis, and we've been very happy with the solution. So I'm going to go ahead and talk through how we use Amazon Web Services and F5 here at MailControl. Wait for the slide here to move. So first I want to let you know about MailControl. So we're a Chicago-based security provider. We've been operating on AWS since day one. Our product primarily is built around malicious tracking, blocking that through email. Our technology intelligently removes tracking from emails transparently for the end user. This tracking can also be used, the type of tracking we block could be used for social engineering attacks, phishing, or malware targeting specifically. So we have our technology will handle this on a server-side basis. So no matter what email client you are using, you'll be protected. We also are working towards helping companies get in compliance for GDPR, which is an upcoming regulation that's going to affect the EU in May of 2018. So we are helping companies prepare for that to make sure that their employees are not tracking other users or violating privacy rights of those users in the EU. So some of the challenges we have here at MailControl, which F5 helped us out with, was we had a lack of visibility insights needed to ensure our customer security. We also have a complex networking environment required that can handle different routing and network and load balancing situations. We use a combination of Amazon Elastic Load Balancers and F5 Big IP appliances as well. So we also needed to have a full-featured traffic management platform to handle all these processes and also allow us to automate our dev and production environments as well as our deployments. And one of the big differences of why we use both ELBs and F5 Big IP appliances is while Amazon Elastic Load Balancers can provide source IP in the headers for both HTTP and HTTPS traffic, at the time of our deployment, we also needed this for TCP traffic as well. And unfortunately, well, for us, fortunately, F5 Big IP appliances allowed us to easily set that up. We also chose F5 because we have a very complex NATing environment on how we balance our outgoing traffic over our contiguous Elastic IP range provided by Amazon Web Services. So why did we choose AWS and why did we choose F5? So for Amazon Web Services, it was simple, a very simple choice. It's been very easy for us to use it between their console, their documentation, their SDKs and CLI tools. Their product offering fits with what we need, whether it be Elastic Load Balancers, their compute sizes, their database products such as RDS Aurora and Dynamo, And the pricing is very clear cut for us. We utilize both spot pricing, on demand, and reserved instances, depending on our usage loads and what we need at that time. For F5, it was familiar with the product. Myself and one of our founders of our company are both familiar with the F5 product offering, and it seems like it would be a very effective tool for us. Another big advantage for us with F5, specifically for a load balance appliance, was that it has a RESTful API interface. And this was discussed earlier, and a big thing why we use that is we use the RESTful interface on a regular basis for different tools, such for monitoring or scaling or configuration. And I'll go into that a little bit deeper later. Also, what we did enjoy with F5 was the flexible pricing through the AWS marketplace. This allowed us to very easily have different F5 instances for development use, for testing, without having to completely purchase a license if we didn't necessarily know if we were going to use that device or that appliance all the time on fully. So the solution for us was obviously, work with F5 and get we chose the Big IP virtual appliance and the utility licensing model. We didn't go with the standard built web application firewall. Because of the nature of what we needed, we decided we wanted to roll our own complete configuration, and this worked very well for us. The utility licensing allows us that we have dev instances behind an F5. We have our production environment as well, and when we're not using our development environment, such as at night on the weekends, we can actually stop those instances. So we're not paying for the cost. We just basically pay for the EBS volume storage. We were also able to fully implement and run this in production within about a week. We were very, very surprised and very surprised that it was that easy for us to work with. The documentation was very good, and our experience with it has been amazing. We haven't had any instances or any outages or lack of confidence in the Big IP product at all. It's been completely solid the entire time since we rolled it in production. And this new environment also makes it easier for us so that we can continuously upgrade without having to factor. So if we want to roll a new version of the Big IP appliance, we can start that up, configure it as we need to, and move it into place without dropping any of our traffic. So we've been very, very happy with the F5 team and what they've been able to provide to us. So some of the big benefits for MailControl with AWS and F5, the key areas are security and compliance, DevOps support, and exceptional stability. So for security compliance, the Big IP local traffic manager, for our sake, the F5 sits in front of our mail transfer agents. So it is intelligently able to route our incoming mail that we're then going to run all of our security profiles on. It allows us to easily move those between different availability zones, different IP pools, and really easily handle all of the traffic for it. The visibility also allows us, the visibility features allow us to provide much better security for our infrastructure, to identify any attempts at security breaches or any bots, for example, trying to access our infrastructure. So the visibility does help us prevent those and block future problems if they do occur. And the tools for monitoring for application performance, network connection, and user context makes it very easy so we can identify if we're reaching the limits of our currently provisioned F5, and we decide, we need to, either move to a larger instance or we need to add another load balancer. And having that data is what's key. You can't really decide what you're going to do without having the proper data in front of you. Another big benefit is the DevOps support. Here at MailControl, we essentially try to automate all of our processes from beginning to end. So for our developers, it allows them to roll out into production very fast with very little interaction to the other support teams. This also includes rolling out F5, Big IP appliances. So we use the iControl REST API, for example, to programmatically program and start up another F5 instance for us. So if we need to reprogram or reprovision an instance very quickly, we can without having to, and also knowing that it will be configured correctly every single time. The idea of DevOps is you do it, you measure twice, cut once kind of idea. We try to automate all of our tasks so we can repeat that situation or that deployment over and over and over again confidently to make sure that the security processes are followed correctly and our applications are deployed properly. And with those APIs, we're also able to provision and deprovision. So we can start up extra F5 instances if we need to handle larger user loads, but then we can also spin them down when we don't need them. For example, here's a very rough diagram of kind of how a small portion of our infrastructure works and how F5 fits into that. As you can see, our data incoming goes to both either our AWS Elastic Load Balancer or our F5 Big IP appliance. Our product offering allows both a cloud product, which sits everything inside of Amazon Web Services. Then we also have an on-premise product, which sits mainly in your data center, and then eventually the data comes into Amazon Web Services. So as you can see, we have multiple mail transfer agents, API servers. Most of our product communicates through a centralized message broker so that we have different workers that will handle different types of data and processes. And we have multiple data stores. We work with both DynamoDB, Elasticsearch, and RDS Aurora. And we've been very happy with all of those products. Something to note though, we actually are very specific for reliability, and this is a big thing that why we really love Amazon Web Services, is the idea of having multiple availability zones in each region. So we run all of our critical infrastructure in at least 3 availability zones at all times, so that should we have any kind of outage or issue, we can always ensure our product is going to be working and our customers' email will be delivered and protected at all times. So some of the benefits, as I spoke earlier, was the exceptional stability. As I said, the Big IP appliance, we have not had any issues with it since day one. It's been handling our traffic very well. We've had large surges in traffic, and it worked without a hiccup. We've been very, very happy with it, and we'll definitely continue to use it in the future. And it's also nice that we have the ability to be highly available with F5, with these F5 Big IP appliances, to make sure that our infrastructure will always be available to our customers. After that, go ahead and hand it back over to Matt.
Thanks, Corey, and thanks, Nathan. Some great information there, guys. All right, so we're now ready to get rolling with Q&A. So we have a bunch of questions that have come in through whilst we're going through the deck. So I think the first one here is for Nathan. Is there a ML, and I'm assuming that's machine learning engine behind iRules?
Yeah, there is a machine learning engine. It's how you use it would be dependent on how you use the iRules. So it's not necessarily that it's baked straight into it, but it's baked into the product itself, so such as ASM. And you can leverage that functionality in iRules depending on the style of attack that you're trying to defeat. So it certainly is there, yes.
Awesome. Okay, very cool. And the next question here, would you be using SSL offloading techniques to inspect, my question's cut off here, let me see if I can make it a bit bigger, to inspect the encrypted traffic?
So yes, we do have full SSL offload. That could be doing the decryption on the client side and then sending the traffic in the clear back to your backend, or re-encrypting it to the backend. But yes, it would be a requirement to decrypt the traffic if you wanted to do L7 inspection and things such as protocol enforcement, session management, and be able to determine whether or not a given client was a bot, if that couldn't be determined from IP intelligence. So if you were trying to glean that from L7 or user level behavioral analysis, it certainly would be required to decrypt the traffic, yes. Okay,
cool. And can F5 distinguish between bad and good bots attacked during learn mode?
We definitely have intelligence built in that can distinguish good and bad bots. But certainly you would have some level of control over that and to be able to influence that in learning mode. To what degree, I guess, would be dependent on your particular policies, but that capability is certainly there.
Okay, the next one here, I like this one. Is scale out available with F5 and AWS?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Is scale out available with F5 and AWS? So from the AWS perspective, we do have what we call auto scaling, but Nathan, do you want to talk about F5 and F5's auto scaling capability?
Yeah, so I think the question specifically was about scale-n, which is our own scaling model where you can add additional big IP instances more or less on demand in order to handle additional load. So that scenario is a little more difficult in the cloud and in AWS because of the way that IPs, L2 and L3 is managed. But you could certainly use the AWS autoscale model to spin up additional F5 instances in order to spread that load across them. So you certainly have options to achieve the same end.
Okay. And can we apply custom ASM policies to AWS WAF VE instead of low, medium, and high?
I think, yes, you should be able to customize those, but how the policy is managed out of band, I think, would depend on some process issues. So I don't want to say that is a model to pursue unless we did some additional kind of research to make sure that it complemented your deployment strategy and policies.
Okay, awesome, thanks. Now we've also got one here. How does F5 WAF differ from the AWS WAF? Well, I mean, I can talk to the AWS WAF, and really, if you think about the AWS WAF or Web Application Firewall, it's more something that you'd use for bread and butter firewall rules, if you will, or WAF, Web Application Firewall rules. Nate, do you want to talk, or Nathan, do you want to talk to the F5 WAF and its capabilities?
Yeah, so we do have exceptionally advanced WAF capabilities, including, as we mentioned, like machine learning and being able to do user level and session level traffic pattern analysis. So, we can do things like client fingerprinting at L7 in order to determine whether or not a system is a bot or a user, and then actually use things like iRules and our policies to push that information down to lower layers of the stack to be able to, say, block the traffic at L3, L4. So really what it comes down to is feature set, and we certainly have, sky's the limit as far as options with not just the included functionality, but also as I mentioned, the iRule functionality, which allows you to do on-the-fly programming of your traffic based on really kind of any kind of conditions that you can specify. So that's something that's fairly unique to us in that respect.
Okay, awesome. So think of the F5 WAF for additional features and functionality above maybe what the AWS WAF could do. There was a question here, is there any added latency when using F5? Now, I noticed, Corey, you'd said you guys over at MailControl hadn't really experienced any added latency. Do you want to talk about that just for a second?
Sure, no problem. Yeah, we since deploying it, we haven't really seen any difference in latency between using either Amazon's Elastic Load Balancer or the F5. For us, we don't do a lot of complex iRule traffic management currently, but it's something that's on our basically on our to-do list here in the future to continue to add on for security. But currently, we have not experienced any additional latency while using it. Specifically for us, we use the F5 for a load balancer in front of mail transfer agents.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Corey. That's great to hear. Nathan, did you have anything you wanted to add there? I think Corey pretty much summed it up. Live customer example there.
Yeah, no, that's awesome information. The only other thing I would add to that is, in many cases, a lot of our customers will see improved performance because there's a lot of, like TCP level optimization that we're doing. We can also do optimization of L7 to basically connection management in order to reuse connections in order for faster spin up to the back end. So, but yeah, I think, you know, Corey had it fairly well covered. So awesome.
Okay, great, thanks. Another one here, does the F5 support dynamic block lists from third-party lists?
We do. We can subscribe to IP intelligence feeds and other third-party feeds. So yes, that'd be something we can support for sure.
Okay, and does the F5, or this was actually, does the product offer some kind of analytics for monitoring and visualization? I'll talk to the AWS platform first. So we do have CloudWatch, and we have things like VPC flow logs that can offer data metrics on what's happening in your deployment in AWS, and they can also plug into other partners for visualization, that sort of thing. Nathan, do you want to talk to any capabilities the F5 might have around that?
Yeah, so there was a screenshot in there. It was probably a little bit difficult to see over the webinar, but we certainly have our AVR, our advanced visualization functionality baked into the product, and that's integrated well with ASM, you know, our WAF engine, which will show you things like, you know, attack traffic patterns, you know, the amount of requests that are malicious. Yes, it's certainly there. And we can also do integration with your third-party visualization and reporting engines. You know, we support full logging offload, high performance, or, you know, high-speed logging in order to get that information out to whatever tools you're using. And we can do normalization across applications for that logging information as well, so that you're not getting it in different formats from one app to the next.
Okay, cool. We have one here. Can we use multiple NICs on F5 with EC2 and ELB with auto scaling? So you can in fact use multiple elastic network interfaces with the F5. Nathan, can you talk to the F5 support around this?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly support multiple NICs. How you would do it with auto scaling, I can't speak to that maybe to the degree that you're asking. I don't see any issue in supporting auto scaling with multiple NICs, though. There's none that I'm aware of.
Okay, great. And do users get root access to the F5 instance?
Absolutely.
Okay. And we have a couple more here. Is there any flexibility for the customer to change the security settings or setup? I'm going to say yes to that one. I mean, you have full control within your AWS environment to control the security of the applications or the deployment that you're deploying inside your application. And Nathan, I'm going to say that's yes on an F5 from an F5 perspective as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with the WAF solution, you have some different options, but then but beyond that, if you wanted to manage it yourself, you could create fairly granular policies that would include stuff like L7 DOS mitigation or whatever's really relevant to your application. We also do stuff like app and server detection so that we can figure out what you're using, whether your backend is like Apache, Nginx, or Windows, PHP, MySQL, etc., and be able to apply signatures that are like attack signature detection and mitigation that are relevant specifically to your apps.
Okay, and another one here, can we encrypt traffic SSL between the ELB and F5?
Well, I guess if it's coming in as encrypted, then we would get it through the ELB since it's just passed as TCP level traffic anyway, right? I mean, so AWS isn't doing SSL offload at, are they doing SSL offload at the ELB level?
I think that might be an option, but maybe we can do a follow-up on this question as well. So I think we can dive deeper and send you some information about the ELB capabilities. To your point, Nathan, if you're receiving SSL traffic, the F5 has the ability to do SSL as it were anyway, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can do the decryption on box there and then do L7 inspection and re-encrypt back to your backend if that's something that you guys require, or just send it in the clear for full SSL offload. But either way, we can also, reuse these SSL and TCP sessions in order to reduce load on your backend, so saving you guys money.
Okay, we have another one here around two F5 load balancers which are on sync. Is it possible in AWS F5?
As I understand the question, yes, there shouldn't be any reason you wouldn't be able to deploy that model like you would normally expect. So there is some connotations, though, with respect to failover because the IPs are managed in AWS, but there's APIs and calls that facilitate that. So the nature of that does change a little bit when you're talking about deployment in AWS versus on-prem infrastructure that you know and manage. But yeah.
Okay, awesome. Now we have another question here about, are there any specific numbers about performance, like an M4 large, 100 I rules, etc.? I can talk to the AWS piece. So we can't give you any specifics around the actual bandwidth that you'll get from an instance, but it does scale depending upon the instance type that you use. That said, Nathan, do you guys have any public numbers around what kind of performance you could expect from using the F5 on AWS?
Yeah, I mean, we have some, but there's also like the different sizing that's available in AWS based on your requirements, right? So you could deploy a smaller instance if you're only processing 200 megs of traffic versus, a larger instance if you're processing a gig or more. So, with the auto scaling that's available, it really just depends on how big you're trying to go, right?
Okay, and there's another one here about capabilities. So are there any capabilities that the virtual edition on AWS doesn't have compared to physical F5 devices?
Really, no. I mean, you get all of the stuff that you would normally expect at, L4 and above, and especially L7, which is where all the magic is happening. Lower layers, of course, we're subject to, how AWS and cloud infrastructure works. So there are certain things that you wouldn't be able to do at lower levels like L2, L3, where we have less control. But anything at L7, yeah, there shouldn't be any limitations or restrictions there, or with SSL, etc.
Okay, great. Now, I'm not sure if you know the answer to this one, but are you on F5 using EBS encrypted root volumes?
That I don't have the answer to that question. We could certainly look into that.
Okay, great. We'll check that out. I mean, root volumes being encrypted have been around for a while, but as the question points out, not always everyone uses them. So yeah, we'll do a follow-up on that question. Okay, is the F5 using VE or hardware-based SSL decrypting?
Well, since it's running in the cloud, it's doing software. However, if you're running infrastructure on premise, you could certainly do the hardware level offload. In fact, if you really wanted to, and you're using the direct connect feature in order to link your on-prem to AWS, you could do SSL offload from your virtual editions to a hardware platform in your data center.
Okay, awesome. Now, I think that's all the questions we really have here and time for. If there's any that we might have missed or not responded to directly, we'll do a follow-up. But that's about all we have time for. If there are any other questions, post them in there and we'll get to them pretty quickly. But other than that, thank you very much for your time, and great having you guys attend. And also, Nathan, from F5, thank you very much. And Corey from MailControl, thank you as well. I think I really enjoyed listening to your story here today. All right, thanks all. Have a great rest of your day.